The year is 900 CE, and snow presses against the timber walls of your longhouse. Outside, the fjord lies dark and silent beneath a sky thick with winter cloud. The wind moves across the valley in low, steady breath. But inside this wooden hall, the air is warm with smoke and firelight. You sit along a bench carved from oak, your back against the wall, and the center hearth burns steadily before you. This is home. The longhouse stretches nearly 30 meters from end to end, its roof arched like the hull of an overturned ship. Thick beams of pine and oak curve overhead, joined carefully with wooden pegs. Turf and thatch insulate the structure, holding warmth inside during the long northern winter. Along both walls, raised wooden platforms serve as seating by day and sleeping space by night. Animal furs soften the planks. Woolen blankets, hand-woven on upright looms, rest folded beside them. The fire in the center is not merely for warmth. It is the heart of the building. Above it, smoke rises toward an opening in the roof, escaping slowly into the cold night. You hear the quiet sounds of domestic life, the scrape of a knife trimming wood, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional crackle of sap within the firewood. A dog lies near the hearth. Sheep and cattle, sheltered in the attached byre at one end of the longhouse, shift occasionally, their presence adding warmth to the shared structure. This building is not just a house. It is a community under one roof. In Viking Age Scandinavia, roughly 793 to 1066 CE, the longhouse was the central architectural form across Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland. Its design was practical, efficient, and suited to climate. It was also deeply social. Unlike later medieval homes divided into private rooms, the longhouse emphasized shared space. Privacy was limited. Family life unfolded collectively. Meals were eaten together. Stories were told before the same fire. Outside these walls, winter dominates. Scandinavian winters were long and dark, particularly in northern regions. Daylight shrank to only a few hours. Snow covered farmland. Fjords froze along their edges. Travel slowed. The longhouse became the center of existence during these months. Earlier in the year, fields surrounding the settlement had been planted with barley and oats. Livestock grazed on summer pasture. Fishing boats launched into the fjord. But now, in midwinter, survival depends on stored food and preserved goods. Wooden chests along the walls hold dried fish, smoked lamb, barley flour, and salted meat. Butter is stored in sealed containers. Ale, brewed during autumn harvest, is poured carefully into carved wooden cups. Viking life was not constant raiding and warfare, as modern popular culture often portrays. Most Scandinavians were farmers, fishers, craftsmen, traders, and herders. Seasonal raiding occurred, particularly among certain groups, but daily life revolved around subsistence, trade, and community. The longhouse reflects this balance. At one end sits the high seat, a slightly elevated area often reserved for the head of household. Decorative carvings sometimes mark this position. Authority here is practical rather than theatrical. Hierarchy exists, but not in the grand stone palaces of southern Europe. Clothing is practical and layered: wool tunics, linen undergarments, leather shoes lined with fur, cloaks clasped with brooches crafted from bronze or silver. Women's dresses are secured with oval brooches at the shoulders. Simple beads of glass or amber hang at the neckline. Textiles were valuable. Spinning and weaving consumed large portions of daily labor. Loom weights, discovered at archaeological sites, confirm the importance of cloth production inside the home. As evening deepens, someone begins a story. Oral tradition carried lore, history, myth, and family lineage across generations. The sagas we know today were written down centuries later in Iceland, but their roots stretch back to evenings like this. Firelit halls where memory was shared aloud. Names of gods pass between listeners: Odin, Thor, Freya. Tales of journeys, harvests, disputes, and marriages fill the space. Children grow up listening to these words. The longhouse is more than shelter. It is education, governance, economy, and culture woven together beneath one roof. The architecture itself reveals adaptation to environment. The curved roof design helps shed snow. Thick timber frames resist coastal winds. Some longhouses were built partially into the earth for insulation. Excavations across Scandinavia, from Borg in Norway to Trelleborg in Denmark, reveal post holes marking where these great wooden halls once stood. Soil stains outline their footprint long after the wood has decayed. Even in absence, their scale remains evident. Some longhouses reached lengths of 50 meters or more in wealthier settlements. Others were modest, housing a single extended family. Within these walls, daily life unfolded in rhythm with season. Morning tasks involved feeding animals, repairing tools, checking stored goods. Afternoons brought weaving, carving, mending fishing nets, sharpening blades. Evenings gathered everyone back toward the fire. There was no glass in the windows. Light came from flame and small openings. Shadows stretched long against timber walls. The world beyond the longhouse could be harsh. Icy seas, rocky terrain, unpredictable weather. But inside, structure and community created stability. And for much of the year, that stability mattered more than conquest. The Viking Age is often remembered for longships crossing open water, for raids along foreign coasts, for expansion into Britain, Ireland, and beyond. But the majority of life happened here, beside the hearth, in the quiet hum of winter, in the measured sharing of food, in the carving of wood and the weaving of cloth, in the longhouse where warmth held back the cold and stories held back the dark. When the winter finally loosens its hold, it does not happen all at once. The snow softens first along the edges of the longhouse roof, dripping slowly from the thatch in steady rhythm. The fjord thaws in narrow bands of dark water. Inside the hall, life begins shifting outward again. The longhouse remains the center, but its doors open more often, and the settlement stretches into motion. Spring in Viking Scandinavia meant work above all else. The stored grain that sustained winter must now return to the earth. Barley and oats were the primary crops across much of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark suited to shorter growing seasons and cooler climates. Fields near the settlement were turned with wooden plows tipped with iron. Oxen, valuable and steady, pulled the weight through soil that had only recently thawed. Agriculture was never easy in the north. The growing season was brief, weather unpredictable. A single poor harvest could shape an entire year. This reality structured Viking life more than distant raids or political ambitions. Every household depended on cooperation. Extended families worked side by side in planting, tending, and eventual harvest. Children learned early to scatter seed evenly, to watch for frost, to gather stones from fields. While the men often handled ploughing and heavier labor, women managed crucial aspects of the household economy that extended far beyond cooking or weaving. Dairy production, churning butter, preserving cheese, required knowledge of timing and temperature. Textile work, one of the most labor-intensive crafts of the era, consumed enormous portions of daily life. Wool from sheep was cleaned, carded, spun into thread, and woven into cloth on upright looms that stood along the walls of the longhouse. Textile production was wealth. Cloth could be traded. Cloaks signaled status. Sailcloth powered ships. The skill of weaving supported both domestic survival and exploration. Archaeological finds of loom weights in longhouse ruins confirm how central this work was. In many homes, weaving frames occupied as much visible space as weapon racks. As spring advanced into summer, the settlement became increasingly active. Fishing intensified along fjords and rivers. Cod, herring, and salmon were caught in abundance during the right seasons. Fish were dried on racks or salted in barrels for preservation. Nets were repaired in courtyards. Boats were turned and tarred. Boat building itself was a seasonal art. Longships, though often romanticized, were practical feats of engineering. Clinker-built hulls, crafted with overlapping planks, allowed flexibility in rough seas. Iron rivets fastened planks together. The design enabled both open ocean travel and shallow river navigation. Shipyards along coastal settlements reveal how central maritime technology was to Viking identity. But even here, daily life remained grounded in routine. Not every man sailed each year. Many remained farmers who occasionally joined expeditions. Others traded peacefully across the Baltic, exchanging furs, amber, iron, and textiles for silver, spices, and goods from distant lands. Trade networks extended from Scandinavia to the British Isles, across the Frankish kingdoms, into Eastern Europe along river systems, and as far as the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Arabic silver coins discovered in Scandinavian hoards testify to vast economic connections. Yet when ships returned, they returned here, to the longhouse. Summer evenings lengthened under northern skies. Daylight lingered far past what southern travelers would expect. Work slowed slightly after harvest. Ale was brewed from barley. Feasts marked seasonal transitions, though not always with rigid calendrical structure. Gatherings celebrated abundance, successful trade, marriages, alliances. The settlement pulsed in cycles rather than constant motion. Autumn carried urgency. Crops were gathered quickly before frost. Livestock were assessed carefully. Some animals were slaughtered before winter to reduce feeding demands. Meat was salted or smoked. Grain stored in raised buildings to protect from dampness and rodents. Firewood was stacked high against longhouse walls. Preparation was survival. In these months, the longhouse filled gradually again with stored goods and returning family members. Tools were repaired. Wool was processed for winter weaving. New beams were added where weather had worn older timber. Roof thatch was reinforced. The longhouse was not static. It required maintenance each year. Law and governance also operated seasonally. Local assemblies, known as things, gathered free men to resolve disputes, establish agreements, and recite laws from memory. Law speakers preserved complex legal codes orally before they were written down in later centuries. These gatherings were social and political events, reinforcing community bonds. Justice did not unfold in distant courtrooms. It occurred in open fields among neighbors. As winter returned, the pace slowed once more. The fjord darkened earlier. Livestock shared warmth within the extended structure of the longhouse. Firelight regained dominance as primary illumination. The rhythm tightened inward. This cyclical life shaped Viking mentality, far more than isolated acts of warfare. Their worldview was structured around season, survival, honor within community, and the careful management of resources. Inside the longhouse, the physical environment mirrored that rhythm. Smoke darkened beams overhead over years of continuous hearth fire. Wooden pillars bore the marks of tools. Benches along walls were worn smooth by generations of use. The air carried a steady scent of wool, wood smoke, leather, and stored grain. There was noise, certainly. Children laughing, livestock shifting, tools striking wood. But it was familiar noise, predictable, human. The architecture itself encouraged shared existence. There were no separate bedrooms, no distant kitchens. The central hearth bound everyone within visible proximity. Authority was exercised within sight of family and kin. Even wealthier chieftains who built larger halls maintained this structure of communal presence. Their halls might be longer, their carvings more elaborate, but the basic design remained the same. One great interior space, structured around fire. As night deepened again in the turning of another year, stories returned to prominence. Tales of exploration, of gods who shaped storms and seasons, of ancestors whose names carried weight in lore gatherings. Memory was currency. Identity was continuity. Life in the Viking Age was not constant drama. It was repetition, adaptation, and resilience. And through every season, from thaw to harvest to frost, the longhouse remained steady, its timber frame holding together the structure of community. As autumn gives way to winter, the world beyond the longhouse grows quieter. The fields are harvested, livestock sheltered, the sea less forgiving. With daylight shortened and frost settling into the earth, attention turns inward, not only to survival, but to belief. Viking religion was woven into daily life rather than separated from it. There were no towering stone temples in most settlements, no centralized clergy presiding over elaborate doctrine. Worship occurred in halls at small wooden shrines or in open clearings beneath trees. Sacredness existed in place as much as structure. Inside the longhouse, ritual did not interrupt life. It accompanied it. The Norse gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, Freyja, and others, were understood not as distant abstractions, but as forces woven into nature and human action. Odin represented wisdom and knowledge, often associated with poetry and sacrifice. Thor, protector of both gods and humans, embodied strength and storm. Freya was linked to fertility and harvest. These figures explain the world's unpredictability: the storm that destroyed a boat, the frost that ruined crops, the calm sea that allowed safe travel. Belief offered structure where certainty could not exist. Midwinter carried particular weight. The winter solstice marked the longest night of the year, a turning point when darkness ceased its advance and light began slowly to return. In Scandinavian lands, where winter could dominate for months, this transition mattered deeply. The festival of Yule, known as Jol, was observed during this season. Unlike modern holidays fixed to precise calendar dates, Yule was tied to seasonal rhythm. It often spanned several days. Preparation began weeks in advance. Ale was brewed specifically for the occasion. Animals might be slaughtered and preserved for a communal feast. Evergreen branches were brought inside the longhouse, a subtle reminder of life persisting beyond frost. The central hearth burned longer and brighter. Gathering during Yule was not simply celebration. It was reassurance. Communal feasts strengthened bonds. Shared drink eased tension accumulated over harsh months. Oaths might be sworn, agreements reaffirmed. The passing of the sun's lowest point in the sky symbolized continuity rather than decline. Ritual offerings, known as blot, were part of this tradition. Animals, often pigs or goats, were sacrificed in honor of the gods. This act was not casual or theatrical. It was structured and meaningful, tied to gratitude and petition. Blood was sometimes sprinkled on altars or symbolic objects, reinforcing the connection between divine favor and human survival. Within the longhouse, these acts occurred in view of the community. The high seat might be draped in symbolic cloth. Drinking horns were passed from hand to hand. Toasts were made to the gods, to ancestors, to the coming year. To an outsider, the scene might seem solemn or even stark. But for those within the hall, it was continuity. Winter rituals reinforced the idea that darkness was temporary. The sun would return. Crops would grow again. Livestock would calve in spring. Trade would resume. Even beyond Yule, smaller rituals shaped the year. Before voyages, offerings were made for safe travel. Before harvest, thanks were given for growth. Marriage ceremonies bound families together through shared vows and witnessed agreements. Burial rites ensured that the dead were remembered and honored. Death itself was understood as passage rather than end. Norse cosmology described multiple possible afterlives: Valhalla, Folkvanga, or Hell, depending on circumstances of death and belief. Yet for most ordinary farmers, daily existence remained grounded in immediate responsibility. rather than constant contemplation of distant halls of warriors. Belief-supported structure, symbols carved into wood or worn as pendants, such as Thor's hammer, functioned as protective markers. Archaeological discoveries of hammer-shaped amulets across Scandinavia confirm their widespread use, particularly during the period when Christianity began spreading northward. Wearing such symbols signaled both faith and cultural identity. By the late Viking Age, Christian influence increasingly entered Scandinavian life. Missionaries traveled through Denmark and Norway. Kings converted for political advantage. Churches were constructed in some settlements, yet for generations, older traditions coexisted alongside new belief systems. Inside the longhouse, the hearth still burned regardless of doctrine. Belief in this world was practical. It acknowledged uncertainty without surrendering control. The gods were powerful but not distant monarchs. They experienced struggle, conflict, even eventual destruction in the prophecy of Ragnarok, the foretold end of the world in Norse mythology. Interestingly, Ragnarok was not final annihilation. After destruction, renewal followed. The world would rise again from the sea. Fields would grow anew. This cyclical worldview aligned closely with the agricultural reality of Scandinavian life. Winter to spring, darkness to light, loss to return. The structure of belief mirrored the structure of survival. As the fire burns low late in winter evening, stories of gods blend with stories of ancestors. The line between myth and memory softens. Children listening near the hearth absorb these narratives not as distant fantasy, but as explanation of their environment. Thunder is Thor's hammer. Wisdom is Odin's gift. Fertility is Freya's blessing. Religion in the Viking Age was not centralized in cathedrals. It lived in wood smoke and shared drink, in carved symbols and spoken oath. Within the longhouse, belief reinforced identity. Identity reinforced community. Community reinforced survival. Outside, the snow continues to fall across the fjord. Inside, firelight glows against timber beams darkened by years of smoke. Voices rise and soften. The longest night will pass, and with it, another cycle will begin. Over time, the world surrounding the longhouse began to shift. Trade expanded. Kings consolidated power. Christianity spread gradually across Scandinavia through the 10th and 11th centuries. Wooden churches rose where small shrines once stood. Crosses replaced hammer amulets in some regions. Laws once recited from memory were eventually written down. The Viking Age, as historians define it, slowly drew toward its close. Yet inside many settlements, daily life did not change overnight. Longhouses continued to be built well into the medieval period. Timber frames still rose from the earth in curved lines. Hearths remained central. Families gathered beneath the same sloping roofs. Agricultural rhythms endured long after foreign faiths arrived. Conversion did not erase memory. It layered over it. In Iceland, where Viking settlers established communities in the 9th century, oral storytelling traditions eventually gave rise to the written sagas. These narratives, composed in the 13th century, preserved echoes of longhouse life. Accounts of feasts, disputes, alliances, voyages, and winters spent indoors beside firelight. While written under Christian influence, they retain details that reflect earlier social structure and worldview. Through these texts and through archaeology, we glimpse what daily existence once felt like inside timber walls. Excavations across Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland continue to reveal the outlines of longhouses long vanished above ground. Soil discolorations mark where posts once stood. Fragments of iron tools, glass beads, loom weights, and animal bones surface in careful layers. Each discovery fills in another quiet detail. A carved brooch tells of craftsmanship. A spindle whirl suggests steady hands at work. Burned grain remnants indicate stored harvest. Even the placement of refuse pits outside former walls reveals patterns of organization. What survives is not the roar of battle, but the imprint of routine. The Viking Age is often remembered through dramatic imagery. Ships cutting through waves, warriors stepping ashore, shields lined in bright formation. Yet those moments were brief compared to the long seasons of farming, weaving, mending, cooking, and gathering within wooden halls. The longhouse was not extraordinary because of spectacle. It was extraordinary because it held life together. It absorbed winter's weight. It sheltered livestock and children alike. It amplified the warmth of a shared hearth. It carried the memory of stories spoken aloud generation after generation. It served as home, workshop, courtroom, and sanctuary. Even as centuries passed and architectural styles evolved, stone replacing timber, private rooms replacing shared halls, something of the longhouse endured in cultural memory. The value of communal gathering, the importance of shared meals, the centrality of story in shaping identity. Today, reconstructed longhouses stand in open-air museums across Scandinavia, offering visitors a sense of scale and atmosphere. Walking inside one, even in modern times, reveals how enclosed and communal the space feels. The ceiling beams arch overhead like the ribs of a ship. The central hearth commands attention. Light filters in through narrow openings. It becomes clear that the Viking world was not built on isolation, but on proximity. Life was close to nature, close to kin, close to the changing sky. The fjord still lies quiet beneath winter clouds. Snow still gathers against timber in the north. And those centuries separate modern observers from those who once lived within these halls, the structure remains understandable. Fire in the center, walls at the edge, people gathered between. As night settles fully across the imagined settlement, the longhouse grows quieter. The final embers of the hearth glow red beneath ash. Voices soften. Woolen cloaks are drawn tighter. Outside, the wind moves across the frozen ground. But inside, there is warmth enough. In that warmth, life continues. No spectacle, no proclamation, just the steady presence of community beneath timber and smoke. And when morning comes, whether in the year 900 or in the centuries that follow, the doors will open again, and the rhythm of work, belief, and gathering will resume. The longhouse stands not as a monument to conquest, but as a reminder that history is built first in ordinary spaces, in shared rooms, in repeated seasons, in quiet endurance. And long after the timber has returned to soil, the memory of that gathered warmth remains. As the centuries moved forward, the Viking world did not disappear in a single dramatic moment. It shifted gradually, the way seasons turn without announcement. Trade routes widened, kings consolidated authority, missionaries traveled north. Alliances formed not only through marriage and oath, but through shared belief in new religious structures that spread from continental Europe. By the late 10th and early 11th centuries, Christianity had taken hold across much of Scandinavia. Denmark formally converted under King Harald Bluetooth. Norway followed under King Olaf Tryggvason and later Olaf Haraldsson. Iceland adopted Christianity through decision at the Alþingi, the National Assembly, in the year 1000 CE, a compromise designed to preserve unity. Yet conversion did not instantly transform daily life. The longhouse remained. Families still gathered around central hearths. Fields still required tending. Livestock still sheltered against the cold. The structure of survival did not vanish because theology shifted. Rather, belief layered itself over existing rhythms. In some settlements, wooden stave churches were built not far from older halls. Their tall, dark timber frames rose from the earth in shapes that, in subtle ways, echoed earlier architecture. Curved beams, carved animal heads, overlapping planks. These design choices did not emerge from emptiness. They evolved from centuries of woodworking knowledge, honed in longhouse construction. Even as political power centralized under monarchies, local communities continued to rely on familiar structures of cooperation. The thing, the legal assembly, persisted under new law codes. Disputes were still resolved through public hearing. Reputation and honor remained central to social identity. Meanwhile, exploration carried Scandinavian settlers beyond their original homelands. Iceland had been colonized beginning in the late 9th century. There, longhouses dotted open landscapes of lava fields and rolling hills. Turf walls replaced timber in some regions due to limited wood supply. Yet the core design, elongated hall, central hearth, shared space, endured. Further west, Norse settlers established colonies in Greenland around 985 CE under Eric the Red. Archaeological remains at sites such as Brattahlid reveal longhouses adapted to even harsher climates. Walls were thicker, insulation more substantial. Life centered even more tightly around survival. For several centuries, these Greenland settlements endured. They farmed, hunted seals, traded walrus ivory with Europe. Eventually, environmental stress and isolation contributed to their decline. But even there, in remote northern reaches, the longhouse stood as the anchor of daily life. Across Scandinavia, architecture evolved slowly. As trade wealth increased in certain towns, such as Hedeby in present-day Germany or Birka in Sweden, urban development expanded. Workshops clustered along shorelines. Markets grew busier. Yet residential life remained grounded in timber structures similar in spirit to earlier halls. Over time, buildings became smaller and more compartmentalized. The grand communal longhouse gradually gave way to divided rooms and separate outbuildings. By the later medieval period, domestic architecture across Scandinavia had shifted noticeably from the open hall model. But memory of the hall did not disappear. In literature preserved centuries later, feasting halls remain central scenes. Heroic sagas unfold within timbered interiors. Legal disputes and reconciliations occur before gathered kin. Even as Christianity reshaped theology, the physical and social memory of communal space persisted in narrative form. Archaeology, emerging as a scientific discipline in the 19th and 20th centuries, brought renewed attention to this earlier world. Excavations uncovered the post holes of vanished halls. Soil patterns revealed wall outlines. Burned layers suggested hearth placement. Artifacts surfaced quietly from beneath farmland. Each discovery deepened understanding, not of battle, but of structure. Glass beads recovered from graves spoke of trade connections reaching as far as the Middle East. Iron tools testified to blacksmithing skill. Combs carved from bone reflected daily grooming habits. Even fragments of preserved textiles revealed weaving patterns. In Denmark, circular fortress sites, such as Trelleborg, demonstrated organized construction under royal authority. In Norway, the Great Hall at Borg, one of the largest ever discovered, illustrated how some chieftains expanded the traditional longhouse into monumental scale without abandoning its core design. Yet despite these variations, the defining image remains simple: a timber frame, a central hearth, benches along the walls, family and kin gathered inside. Modern reconstructions allow visitors to step inside recreated halls. The air carries faint scent of wood. Light filters from narrow openings. The ceiling arches overhead in steady curve. Standing there, it becomes clear that this space was designed for endurance. It held heat. It held sound. It held story. The Viking Age, so often reduced to ships and swords, was sustained by these interior worlds. Without the longhouse, there would have been no voyages, no trade, no law assemblies, no seasonal feasts. The exterior achievements depended entirely upon interior stability. As the final embers of a winter night fade in imagination, the scene returns to stillness. Snow rests against thick turf walls. Livestock breathe slowly in the byre. The fjord lies silent under distant stars. Inside, the fire dims to red glow. The longhouse does not announce its importance. It does not rise in stone to demand remembrance. Its timber eventually rots. Its posts sink back into soil. Its roof collapses under centuries of weather. And yet, its design echoes forward, in shared meals, in gathered family, in seasonal rhythm, in stories told across generations. History often remembers conquest first and structure second. But for those who lived within these walls, structure was survival. It was the quiet architecture that allowed everything else to unfold. Morning will come, doors will open, work will resume, and though the centuries have passed, the image remains steady. a hall of wood and smoke, holding warmth against the northern cold.